If you think the Nintendo Game Boy was the world's first handheld cartridge-based game system, the folks at Milton Bradley might want to have a talk with you. In fact, so do we, because Tech Throwback starts now. Hi there, and welcome to Tech Throwback, the program that brings you the techno trends from way back when. I'm your host, Bill Robert, and today we'll take a look at an interesting way they used to play football back in the 70s, also the latest in the Atari emulator sweepstakes. But first, we teased it at the top, the first ever handheld cartridge-based game system. It's today's piece of handy tech. Well, here it is, as we promised, the first ever handheld cartridge-based gaming system. And no, it wasn't the Nintendo Game Boy, it was this, from Milton Bradley, the Microvision Programmable Electronic Game System. Now, this was interesting in the fact that it was a cartridge-based game system, but some of the controls also came as part of the cartridge. Let's do a quick unbox and show you here. First thing we'll do is take the top off the box. Now, the box actually did come with one cartridge, much like Nintendo came with the ever-present Super Mario. This one came with one called Blockbuster. So here you basically have, here you have the controller, and here you have the cartridge. So what we're going to do is basically pull everything out here. Make sure the foam goes back in the right spot. And for now, we'll put this away. So this is the cartridge, and you see right here you've got actually buttons. These technically aren't buttons, they're overlays that correspond with parts on this touchpad here. So what you basically do is you take the cartridge and you just plug it in there, snap it in, and you're ready to play. Now, the main controller is this little knob that's down the bottom here, but you also have, depending on the game, now different games have different configurations here. Some have more buttons. I think this is probably one of the ones that has the fewest. But so what you do is you basically have three control buttons plus your go button. This one controls how many balls you get during the game. This is Blockbuster, which is basically their version of Breakout. So you have a choice, I think, of 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9 balls per game. This gives you speed. You can play slow or fast, and you can have a wide or a narrow paddle. And then the button down here is marked Go, and you hit that, and it's basically go. It just, this is the one, this is your serve button basically. This is what starts things up. So what we're going to do is power this thing up and do some gameplay. But before we get to play around with the Milton Bradley Microvision system, let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. This is the Microvision Programmable Electronic Game System. It was put out by Milton Bradley in November of 1979. The list price for the main unit was $49.99. Additional cartridges cost $19.99. Now, the interesting thing here was in most games, the CPU or the central processing unit sits in the game console, the home deck. In this case, the CPU was in the game cartridge. Each game cartridge had its own CPU. Now, the LCD display wasn't that big. The resolution was only 16 by 16 pixels, so it was pretty limited as far as what you could do for gaming action. In addition, the machine was beset with some production problems. The LCD displays had a problem with leaking liquid into the upper levels and causing a discoloration known as screen rot. Also, you had to be careful around the unit. They were very sensitive to static discharge, could damage the system if you touch it in the wrong place. In fact, they actually wound up sending out pieces of gold foil that you could stick over part of your console so you didn't zap your system. Also, the keyboard overlays, they broke over time, and the original design with 2 batteries, unfortunately, there wasn't really a good way to get the polarity of the batteries right, so that caused some shorting issues, some overheating, and things like that. Only 12 games were ever released for the system, and it really was a lackluster response for it. It was released in 1979. Milton Bradley discontinued it in 1981. So now the Blockbuster cartridge is installed. What we're going to do is hit the power switch, which is right here, slide it on, and boom, right there you see. Try and angle this for you because this LCD display is kind of hard to see. As you can see, we've had to put some extra light on it to really get it to show up on camera here. But you're seeing right now 3 characters up here. 7, that's the number of balls you have per game. S is slow speed, and T is for the paddle. Now I'm going to hit go, and you're going to see now 7 balls, and the score is 0. So I hit go again, and you're going to see there are the strips right there. And along with that, I have the little controller down here. So you see that go back and forth there. Use the little knob, and now I will attempt to play this. Here we go. And so there you go. So you basically just go up and down. And so I've got, I scored 10, yay. And I've still got 6 balls left, so we'll go again. You see, over a little bit there. So there you go, Blockbuster. Like I said, it's basically, you know, it's Milton Bradley's own version of Breakout, which is a very popular game that you've seen in game systems through the years from Atari right on. In addition to Blockbuster, which once again, as I mentioned, came included with the game deck, I have a few other examples to demo for you here today. There's baseball, bowling, pinball, and this one, which they actually kind of put out as a tie-in for the Star Trek, which at the time, Star Trek the Motion Picture had just come out or was coming out, and they made Star Trek Phaser Strike. We'll start off and load up Star Trek Phaser Strike. Now, in all honesty, there's only so much you could do with a game title for the Microvision because you're talking about a screen that basically the pixel size is about 16 by 16. So you're not going to see a lot of detail and graphics there. But nonetheless, we've got it. So here we go. Phasers at the ready. Let's get set to play some Star Trek. So this is Star Trek Phaser Strike, and as I mentioned, different games had different numbers of button overlays. Blockbuster only had 4. This one has 7, actually. This one allows you to set the size of your targets. This one allows you to set the number of your targets and the speed of your targets. This is the go button, which means basically start that level of the game, and then left, center, and right guns. So I'll hit go now, and you got your 3 guns here, and whoops, missed a couple. There we go, hit 1. Missed 1 there. Missed 1 there. Hit that one, missed 1 there. Going from the side, missed that one there. There we go. 3, not a very good score for the first time out. Yeah, so you can see that it's a really basic game. You just have bars going up and down, and you have the little gun shooting stuff. It's not really a Star Trek game. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe it takes place in space, but this is more air-sea battle and missile command had a baby. This isn't really Star Trek, but nonetheless, it's what they had at the time. And once again, you just clip everything and it comes right out here. And this is the cartridge. Once again, you get the button overlays and you actually have the screen with a little legend up the top here. And then you have the top here with just the part that slides back, and that's what connects to the system there. So that's Star Trek Phaser Strike. Like I said, not much, you know, it's kind of fun, but you know, I don't know if I'd call it a Star Trek game. Next we'll go to bowling, and actually this one works out pretty well. Once again, see here, once again we go back to, there are 4 overlays, but they're in different positions this time. So we just plug this in. Now your buttons here, you've got 4 of them as I mentioned. You've got players, that basically determines the number of players. We're just going with 1 here. The speed, and then bowl, and then go. So what we're going to do is power it on. Down we go. Boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom. Steer Reich. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. You see 27 score, but then you see plus, because it's 27 plus a ball because you're working on a strike here. So now we're going to go to our next frame here. Double. Yes. Here we go. And so that's bowling for the Microvision. Once again, a fun little game and actually pretty simple. Some of these games sometimes it's a little difficult to pick up. First game here, I scored in the 150s, so, which is actually better than I do on most games for the first time trying them out. But so that is bowling for the Microvision. Now we have a couple more. Pinball. Pinball actually gets kind of hard to see, so I don't know how it translates to TV. So I'm not really going to get into that. But they do have a pinball game there too, which I have here. But the one we're going to get into here is baseball. This is probably the coolest Microvision game I've seen, of the few that I've seen so far. This one's got a 6-button control surface here, and you also have the diamond in here. Hello! So you've got the diamond in here, and this is a game where sometimes on a handheld baseball game, you control running, you control all kinds of stuff. Here, it's just you're just hitting, which is pretty cool. So we're just going to slide this in, and as the guy in the suit likes to say, play ball! That was in tight. Fouled that one off. Hit that one out, and it looks like I flied out to left field again, which I did. There we go, 1, 2, 3. Ha ha ha! Home run right up the first base line. Yeah! Yahoo! Fouled that one off. See, I'm having good luck to the opposite field today. Unless they pitch me too far inside. So there you go. Have some bat swinging fun here with your Microvision. And as I mentioned during the gameplay, you know, we talked about the screen rot before, but really, as long as you can get it at a good angle where you can see it, you can still play the game. It's just sometimes the screen rot can be a pain in the neck, especially when you're trying to photograph the thing. Anyway, coming up next, as I mentioned before, we have the latest entry in the Atari Emulator Sweepstakes. That's today's New Dog, Old Tricks. Well, here we are in the Tech Throwback Game Room, and we mentioned at the head of the show that we'd be doing one of the newest members of the Atari Emulator Sweepstakes. On an earlier edition of Tech Throwback, we showed you the little handheld Atari game console. There has also been a series called the Atari Flashback, and actually the first one you can see right here. Now this is once again one of these consoles where you have the Atari games built into ROM. This one actually had ports from the Atari 7800, not the 2600, and they were more unfamiliar versions of things like Centipede and Asteroids, but you see here the controllers were a little different too, and well, the white electrical tape, that's courtesy of my cats who like to chomp on cables from time to time. But this was the first Atari Flashback game console. They've gone through a few iterations since, and the one we're going to bring you today is the latest. We present to you the Atari Flashback 6. Now this original game, the original handheld game that we did before had like 10 or 12 games in ROM. This one had about 20. This one here has 100 games loaded in the console. So let's just put this off to the side and show you what the Atari Flashback 6 has. First of all, it's got the classic controllers, the classic 2600 style controllers. However, you notice they're wireless, which is a nice feature of this. This one we had the wired issue. I mentioned before the cats that like to chomp on cables, well, this prevents that. Yeah, that electrical tape I showed you in the other controller, yeah, meow. But anyway, you've got two controllers here. And then you've got the game deck too, which has the built-in AV cable and also the power supply. So you just basically plug this right in and go. Before we really start to get into this too much, let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. This is the Atari Flashback 6 game system. It was manufactured by the At Games company, and the game first came out in September of 2015. Retail price is $39.99. There's actually a deluxe collector's edition with 2 paddle controllers added. That one sells for, depending on where you see it, anywhere from $65 to $75. Improvements over the Flashback 5 include wireless controllers and 100 built-in games. Now the game has 9-pin sockets in the front that allow you to connect your old original Atari controllers and other accessories. So that's a nice kind of feature where you can plug in legacy Atari gear to work with the Atari Flashback 6. And as you notice, this one looks like a miniature little brother of the Atari 2600 console. Now, I mentioned before that the controllers here were wireless, and basically there are different types of wireless controllers for games. Sometimes if you have wireless controllers on game, they can be either be RF, which is radio frequency, or sometimes, like for instance in my Roku, that's game enabled, the controller actually has a Bluetooth connection between the controller and the deck. In this case though, this is IR, it's infrared, so it's basically just optical. The downside of that being, obviously, you have to basically be line of sight. These have to line up, the sensor and the thing, in order for this to play properly, so you can't just have it wherever. You kind of have to hold it out and make sure you hit the game, but that's just one small drawback. But here we go. So we have our controllers, we have our game deck, we have everything we need. We have power, we have audio and video. And now let's fire this up. Indeed, one of the coolest parts about this, I mentioned before the fact you get the wireless infrared controllers, but also the fact that there are actually 2 jacks in front of the console, and they're just a standard 9-pin, almost like a DB9 configuration. And they can be used for classic Atari controllers. Yes, you can actually use legacy Atari controllers into this, which is a pretty cool function. Once again, it's not something I probably do because I've already told you I have cats that chew on this stuff, so the wireless option sits fine with me. So let's get into it here as we take a look at the menus here. First thing you'll notice, the last couple of games we mentioned, we showed on the show, you saw basically that there was 1 page of games and you can just scroll through the whole thing. Here, we can scroll through all the games here, but then you've got multiple pages of everything. This one's got 100 games and they're all loaded. And this thing's light as a feather, which is pretty amazing. So let's start out like we would normally do on any type of Atari demo, doing what else? Asteroids. So here we go. This is the 1981 Atari 2600 port of Asteroids. It's not the same one that's on the Flashback 1, which I mentioned, which was the 7800 emulator. This one works just like the Atari 2600. One thing I noticed is the controllers are a little not shaky, but they're not quite as detailed as the original 2600 controllers. My hand movements are getting a little confused here, but Here we go. Yeah, anytime I try and move laterally, it wants to spin me around. Like a record, baby, round, round. And I wound up getting killed for that. Now that we've done some playing around in the asteroid field, let's check something else out. Oh, let's see. Let's go through some of the other items we have here. Centipede, we've done Centipede before. In fact, we've done Centipede a bunch of times. So let's go to some of the other possibilities here. Let's see. Well, let's do Breakout because we just did the Blockbuster on the Microvision, so let's do that. One of the things I'm noticing here is, and also sometimes if you move the controller too fast, it's almost like the ball wants to move with the controller, which is kind of interesting. So that's a quick look at Breakout. I figure we did Blockbuster on the Microvision, might as well do Breakout on this. Now let's take a look at some of the other games in the Atari Flashback 6. Missile Command, here we go. One of the classic games of all time for the Atari 2600. Just start it up. And this is absolutely the 2600 port of Missile Command. Once again, works a little different than the arcade version. Like we explained before, the arcade version, you had 3 different shooting points. Here you only had the 1 shooting point. So I had to make sure that you get your cursor there in plenty of time to hit all the missiles. Got that one. Save that, save myself, and then save the city that's about to get nuked. There we go. So there you go, Missile Command, just like it was back in the days of the 2600. Of course, it was the home port. It wasn't the arcade version of Missile Command. If you want that, Atari put out this great game called I think it was the 30th Anniversary Edition, which is available for the PC. Check that out because you've got great ones like Pong and Asteroids and all the great ones in the original arcade versions, and they even have the original arcade graphics to border the screen. So that's pretty cool there. But right now, let's get more games off of this. Starship, Solaris, Space Attack, Space Invaders, Starship, Star Strike. Now it's interesting because the original Atari ones didn't have Space Invaders. I think one of the reasons was maybe they didn't have full rights to the game, but in this particular case, here we go. And look at all this. This actually looks more like an arcade port than it does the 2600 port, but that's fine. If you notice the letters on the Atari, because of the fact that the pixels on the screen were much larger, you actually had bigger lettering. This almost looks like something that would play off like a color computer or an Apple II or something. So this actually might be one of the computer ports too. I mean, I confess that when I was young, I played the 2600. I never played any of the others, the 5200 or the 7800. I didn't even really mess around with the Atari computers. I was more of a Radio Shack TRS-80 guy. But this looks more like a computer port than it does a game system of the time of the 2600. So this might be a little bit of a mismatch of everything here because of the fact that, once again, it's a later game and they had to add different stuff. But this is actually a very nice version of Space Invaders. I'm very happy with this. Some of the older ones get very blocky. And actually, this is probably the best emulation of Space Invaders since Space Armada for the Intellivision. So there you have it, the Atari Flashback 6. A lot of bang for the buck. I only paid about $40 for it, but it's got over 100 games. And you remember once upon a time, the games themselves were $30, $40 a piece. So that's a pretty good value there. And once again, it does have the wireless controllers. But if you have some legacy Atari gear with the standard joystick connection, you can plug it in here too, which might not be a bad idea because actually this, although I got used to it, the original Atari controllers still track better, and you don't have to worry sometimes, like if you've got your hand right here and you're trying to play and you can't because you're blocking the thingy. Yeah, it doesn't work. But still, these wireless controllers I'll hang on to because, as I've mentioned before, meow. Anyway, that'll do it for our look at the Flashback 6. Coming up next, I mentioned this before, an interesting way people played football back in the 1970s, and that's today's way back playback. Yep, this playback is definitely going way back today. This is a toy that circa 1971, and I mentioned a unique way for people to play football. Once upon a time, you had, well, obviously, just go out, grab a football and throw it around, but then you had electric football, which basically was this big piece of metal painted up like a football field with these, the players you put on it. And you hit this power switch, which basically starts a motor, which makes the board vibrate, and all the players kind of move on their own, and you can set it up and do different plays. So that's how the whole thing started. And then later on, you had the electronic games like Mattel's Football 2, Football 1, these things. Tandy came out with a couple of versions. This is a 2-player variant. And so there are a number of ways for people to basically play football through the use of electronics or electricity. And between electric football and the handheld games was this, Mattel's Talking Monday Night Football. Now what this was this was a game that was set up where you basically had different plays, and what they did was they offered play-by-play on these little records, these little phonograph records here. And then what you would do is you would stick them into this voice box here and play them back and get the play-by-play. And it would dictate how the game went. Seems pretty wild, right? I know. But this is the way they did it for a while. Now, in full disclosure, to start off this segment, let me just say that when I picked up this actually on eBay recently, the voice box was not working, so I had to pull it apart and do some surgery on it. So it's still not 100%. The motor's tired and the drive belts are a little loose, but we'll try and replicate gameplay as best we can with what we have here. Let's take a look at the Tech Throwback white paper. This is Mattel's ABC Talking Monday Night Football. It was manufactured by Mattel, who was based in El Segundo, California. Now, the game was originally released in 1971 as Talking Football. Then they re-released it with the ABC Monday Night Football branding in 1977. It's basically a board game that uses commentary tracks on miniature records to determine the outcome of gameplay. The game came with 13 records for various plays and scenarios, and there was no electronic component in the actual playback unit. The record sound was played back via acoustic coupling. It was basically just vibration off a needle to a vibrating part of the speaker. So first of all, you notice there are a number of different records here. Now the game came with 13 records in all, and you had records mostly for offensive and defensive plays, but you also had special discs for cases like kickoffs, interceptions, and fumbles. And you notice on one side of the disc here, you've got just the grooves, like an actual record. And on the back, you actually have selections for things like short pass, long pass, blitz, things like that. And what you would do is you would drop the records into this voice box, and then they would play out and dictate what happened on the play. So what we're going to do is just pick these up right now. You have the game board here, which is basically a football field, complete with the Mattel logo in the middle. On one side here you have this plastic slide, and the cool thing about this plastic slide is if you feel it, it feels exactly like the same kind of plastic that Mattel used when they made the track segments for all their Hot Wheels sets there. So I feel it's a tactile reminiscence. It's all of a sudden it's like, that's exactly the same type of plastic they would use back when they would make all the different tracks for Hot Wheels. My personal favorite was one I got for Christmas one year, Thundershift 500. Played with that one a lot. So you've got your multiple records here, and then what you have your coin flip for your kickoffs. There are goalposts here too, but those didn't come as part of the package. This is the scoreboard here. This is your quarter, 1, 2, 3, or 4. This is your down, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then these are plays basically per quarter. There were 20 plays, so anytime you did a play, afterwards you would just move it over here, and once you got up to here, it was time for a new quarter. So that's your scoreboard. The pieces are in place, and let's play some football. First thing we'll do is we'll do the kickoff, so we'll get the kickoff record. We'll just drop it in here, and you will hear the play-by-play for the kickoff. Okay, so it was a 45-yard kick, and then it was returned for 35 yards, so as a result, since they would go from right here, so you'd go 40 down, so basically that's 10, 20, 30, 40 down here, and then 25, so basically you're talking about right about the 50. So here is your ball position marker, and this is your first down marker. So basically what you have to do now is, now that we have the kickoff record taken care of, you pick one of the offensive records. Now, there are two players that play this, and basically the side with the grooves goes over here because there's an offense and a defensive side to this controller. As you can see here, that says offense here. The other one says defense, but the label fell off. But anyway, so here we go. So what you do is, first of all, you put the record in, and you just put it in like so. But then, before it actually goes in, the defense gets to scroll through the different options and pick a play. So let's see here. Let's go with... let's see what happens if you play for an inside run.
Fake to the fullback. He gives to the halfback on the counter play. 3-yard gain.
Okay, so a 3-yard gain on that one right there. So now you can pop that one out. So 3 yards. So it's second down. And we actually have done two plays, so we go from here to here. And so Now if you look at the field, so it just got 3 yards on that one, so now it's going to be 2nd and 7, and we're at the 47-yard line, so what we'll do is we'll pick another record, and obviously since there's no defensive player, I'll just go to a random position, drop the record, and then see what the actual result of the play is.
With the quarterback waiting for him, 2-yard loss.
Okay, so there you go, 2-yard loss, so you put that back down there, so that's another play that's gone. And third down now, and looks like 9 yards, so we're gonna need a big play on 3rd down. So let's grab another disc, and once again, we're just going with any random disc here, with any random position, just to kind of move this through again. Let's see what happens on 3rd down.
Oh, what pass! Wide receiver open in the end zone. Touchdown!
So there we go. Don't really know what happened in the first part of the play, but the last play, touchdown! We did get a score in there. So that's Mattel's Talking Monday Night Football. And I mentioned, you know, this is in kind of rough shape. So quickly before we go, I want to show you this because when I pulled this apart, and the first thing is, this isn't actually screwed together. It's glued, so I had to go with a utility knife and score the whole thing until the seams let go. As I mentioned, I had to take this apart, and one of the things I found is I'm not sure if I can call this an electronic football game. It's more of an electric football game because there were no electronics in here. I pulled this out, I was expecting to see wires and circuits and everything. But if you look in, first of all, the first thing you'll notice is the speaker isn't even connected with a wire. It's just this thing here which moves the sound, which works on pure vibration. So when you think about it, this thing is basically a handheld Victrola. Now when you put the record in, let me just put one in for demonstration here. This is what happens. So you see here, it basically starts running, and what happens is, when this goes in, it actually trips a motor, trips a contact that actually starts this motor spinning, and now the record's spinning. And if I push this closer, actually, you can actually hear it. Once again, as I mentioned, this is basically, you know, this is a handheld Victrola, is all it is basically. And there's not even a single wire in the thing. It's all, the only electrical part is these pieces of metal that work as the conductor, and they're plugged solid right into the motor. And if you notice here, you've got, you know, this is the linkage for starting and stopping everything. This is your play and your eject. Now the needle actually is on this little orange thing right here that you see there. So this is the whole thing where the whole thing is put together, and it's basically just one big electrical little Victrola thing going. So there you go. That's some pretty wild stuff there. So this is how a lot of kids had their fun playing football back in the 70s, thanks to the folks over at Mattel and whoever recorded all these records here. Think of it, 13 records. 13 different little records here. And once again, you know, I'm an avid collector of vinyl, so this is a curiosity to me. This actually works almost like, for a while you had VCR games where basically the outcome was on a VCR videotape. And there are DVD games too. I actually have one at home, a DVD Seen It trivia game of the James Bond series. But this was how it started. Little records with play-by-play telling you where the football went. And that's Mattel. Actually, let's put this back up because the artwork on the box is pretty impressive too. Mattel's Talking Monday Night Football. And that'll finish our look at the way we used to compute and play back in the day. I'm your host, Bill Robert. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget, we'll join you next time with more stuff, once again, that's cool and old school. Till then, thanks for tuning in to Tech Throwback.